I am on my way home after a beautiful walk in the snow. So a few weeks back, I started working on a Christmas dress, and I'm really excited to show you guys the process and the result. So let's go inside and have a look. When I started this project, I knew that I wanted a similar style corseted bodice as the one that I used for a previous video where I made a sort of steampunky corset. So I made a sketch where I just started with that silhouette and just elongated it into a dress. This is a pattern that has full cups with underwires and boning throughout, so I knew I needed a corset material for the lining because I wanted to lace it up relatively tight in the back. And for the sleeves, I had this Vogue pattern I knew I could use, and also this other Vogue pattern that I could use for a simple A-line skirt. I wanted to incorporate some vintage curtains that I found secondhand, and I envisioned using that for the center front panel and the center back, and also for at least parts of the sleeves. And for the rest of the dress, I wanted to use red velvet because I feel like that's kind of the epitome of Christmas. I did consider using faux leather for the yoke, but I ended up not having enough for that, so I later abandoned that idea. That is the back panel, and then the side back, side front, and front panel. And there are cup pieces there. Here's the sleeve, so that has a middle panel and two side panels. And here you can see the curtain fabric, and I'm not entirely sure why it gives me Christmas vibes, but it does. The only problem with this fabric is the really low thread count, which means that there are thick fibers and they are sparse, so it's less durable. It is slightly see-through. It more easily distorts in terms of the shape, and it unravels quite easily. So I started off by just cutting this fabric for the front, the back, and the middle of the sleeve, trying to center the pattern on these pieces. I've cut the front and center piece, and I still want to use it, but I think I'll have to line it somehow. It is quite see-through. For the sleeves, that's not an issue, so I'm going to use this for the center of the sleeve as well. I was considering using this fabric for the center back as well. For the rest of this dress, I've ordered some red velvet fabric. I'm going to try to sew the lining and the outer part as a whole separately, because I want the underwire and most of the boning to just be in the lining. Yeah. I'm going to use a combination of coutil for the bodice part mostly, but for the cup itself, this is just a mesh. So I'm just going to start sewing these together. I'm going to start off with the cups. Here it is. And I'm going to sew that to the yoke like that, basically. Here are the cups inserted into the yoke, and then I could move on to the rest of the panels, starting with the front and moving backwards. I've sewn on not all the panels, but the main panels for the bodice, and not the cups and not the yoke, but everything else. And the thing is, I don't really want to clip the seam allowance too much because I want to use the seam allowance for the boning channels. And especially this princess seam on the back, it needs to be clipped quite a bit to look nice. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clip it, but I'm not gonna cut away from it. I'm gonna sew boning channels afterwards, I think. After that, I'm gonna sew on the yoke piece. I'm gonna sew in the cup first, and then I'm gonna do the shoulder seam afterwards. So the lining is mostly done. I'm just gonna show you guys what it looks like. So I put in underwire casing, so that's in, and I've sewn the shoulder seam. So I'm just gonna put this aside for now, start working on the outer material, and get back to this later on. I'm doing a test for the sleeves. Here are the components for the sleeve. That one is inside out, but that's fine. So I'm just gonna sew them together, and here is where the slit will be. So this is the right sleeve. So the sleeve fits me, but now I need to see if it actually fits the armhole. It's a bit on the tight side over here, so I think maybe I'll have to add a bit more fullness to the sleeve. So moving on to the bonings, I'm just going to cut that, and I'm going to use flat steel for the front and back and spiral steel for everything else, and use a tipping fluid on the ends. So I put in some markings here, 1.5 centimeters from the bottom, and the same for the top. I do not really have the correct tools to cut this. What I usually do is I just use these to get a bit of a dent in them, and then I just try to use my arm strength, which is very limited. And after cutting all that boning, I used this plastic dip for the tips, just to avoid any sharp edges snagging on the fabric or poking holes. And finally, the red velvet fabric arrived after, I think, weeks of waiting. I was scared I wasn't gonna have enough of this, and thankfully I can now see that I do, which is a great relief. I'm gonna cut the side panels and the parts for the sleeves, and also the yoke thingy. Yeah, and I'm also gonna cut the cup pieces, and I've considered doing some sort of embroidery on the yoke on the front. I think at this point I've cut everything. I did also put backing on the old curtains that I'm going to use. So I just put a layer of red linen on the back. So I just need to check that I have all the pieces, and then I can start assemble, which is nice. That is the cup panels done with the front yoke and everything. Next up, I am going to sew together center, front, and side. The front is actually done, and I'm gonna start the back, and I did just sew on the yoke. It's just a straight stitch, and I'm gonna sew the side back panel to this one. And after this, I sew the front and the back together on the shoulder seam, just making sure I clipped it so that it would fit nicely. Now it's really uncharted territory here because I'm gonna try to sew the lining to the outer part of the dress, and I'm just gonna sew that around the neckline. I made a sort of design for an embroidery, which is here. It's sort of based on the pattern in the curtain fabric. So if you guys see here, I've drafted the pattern onto some interfacing. So I'm just gonna iron that on to the back on the yoke. Here I'm just putting on some bias tape for the lower edge of the lining. Here are the parts of the sleeve, so I just sewed these together and then gathered the top edge and fitted it into the armhole. At this point, what I really have left is sewing the back, putting in boning in the back, putting in the grommets, and hemming. So here's the thing, the sleeves do not fit. It's not wide enough over the shoulders, so it kind of just drags up. What I ended up doing is what you can see here, just undoing parts of the seam in the sleeve, and then I also just cut it open to make sure that I added enough fullness. I put in a new sleeve, and that works a lot better. So I'm going to do the same to the other one as well and sew this properly in, because this is just basted now to just check the fit. Both of the sleeves are in, and I want to make what is called a modesty panel, something that covers the back of the gap between the two sides where you lace up. I can't believe I didn't think of this before doing the sleeves, because I want to sew the edges of the back right sides together, and having put in the sleeves, the lining and the outer layer are very much connected in certain areas, meaning that turning them the other way is not that easy. I have to really like burrito the two layers. I've done it on one side just to test it, and I think it worked, and the flap seems to also work. I need to do the same on the other side. After some testing and some deliberation, I think I might need a zipper for the back of the skirt. I'm gonna try to install that and put in grommets afterwards. And thankfully that worked out well, and I could move on to putting in grommets in the back edge. And then I could put in the final pieces of boning on each side of the grommets in the back. In terms of the hemming, I've tried different types of bias binding. It feels a bit too tacked on, so I think I'm just gonna turn it in. I want to do an invisible hem stitch if I'm gonna do it that way. Kind of time consuming. That's the sort of sacrifice made. For the sleeves, I'm gonna do the same thing, just blind stitch the hem. But I wanna finish off the corners nicely, so I think I'll do what's called a mitered corner to just kind of finish it off nicely on the inside. And after that, I'm gonna do some fixing to the embroidery, I think, and then do the upper back opening. I'm in the process of sort of fixing the embroidery a bit. I did it too loose to begin with, and I had nicked some of the threads and it was starting to show a bit. So I'm trying to like tighten it up. I just try to sew down the middle and also give it a circumference. So to avoid creating extra space between the threads, I just go sort of like into the last stitch a bit. And now for the part of this project that gave me the biggest headache, which was how to close up the upper back over the lacing. My original plan was to have lacing there as well. However, it ended up sort of overlapping in the back instead of being together like this. So I ended up trying a lot of different solutions. I considered buttons, I considered snap fasteners, I considered just kind of blind stitching it shut, but I didn't really end comfortably on any solution. So what I ended up doing was to sort of just impulsively put in grommets anyway and hope for the best. I kind of regret putting grommets into the upper part of the back. I did try one thing that I kind of think works, just maybe not with this ribbon. I just kind of laced it up one on top of the other and went in and out like this instead. And I kind of like the effect of that. The reason why I tried to do this, have lace up in the back at all, was that I had this idea that it could be cool if it laced up here and then went onto the front and I could just kind of tie a bow in the neck area. I still want to do that because when fixing this embroidery, I imagined it would lay flat against the chest, but it kind of dips out a bit. And when it does, you kind of get the back, which doesn't look that good. And I think some sort of tying up could fix that. I first tried a more narrow ribbon for this, but I just found this red color and there was something about the two reds together that just didn't sit right with me. So I ended up going back to the white, but what I did was to just fold it in half and sew it flat for the part in the upper back so that it wouldn't be so bulky and fit more snugly into the smaller grommets. Do you think the lacing up in the back worked in the upper back, or do you think I should have gone for like buttons instead? I'm having second thoughts about that, so if you have any thoughts on that, please let me know. And with the lacing up finished, that is the dress done, and all that remains is to just show you guys the finished results. I hope you guys enjoyed following along on this project. Have a great end of the year, no matter how you're spending that, and I hope to see you guys in 2025. Bye for now.